Hi, I'm Katrina, and this is Boldly Challenging Ableism. I'm your host, Katrina Simons. I'm the Community Program Specialist at the Institute on Community Integration at the University of Minnesota. This program explores various topics that impact people with disabilities in our community. Each episode addresses a different aspect of our society within the context of ableism. Ableism is the prejudice that stems from the belief or belief system that assumes someone is less capable or less worthy because of a real or perceived difference in ability or function. On this program, we hope to answer some questions you may have been afraid to ask, or maybe some you didn't even know you had. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us on Boldly today. We're really excited because today we're going to talk about transition, which is a topic that is really exciting to me. I did an internship in it when I was in college. And we have Renata here today, who's been at ICI for 20 years, and we're just really happy to have her here. So thanks for coming.
Thanks, Trina. It's great to be here with you.
Okay, so you're here to talk to us about transition. But first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role here at ICI?
Yeah, I would love to. So I've worked at ICI for almost 20 years, and I currently work as a senior researcher and also as sort of the new lead on the education and policy area of ICI.
When you started here, where did you start?
I started when I was still finishing my PhD in special education and worked mostly with students with disabilities. But then as the years went by, I transitioned to working also with adults with disabilities.
Can you tell us why you chose to build your career around working with people with disabilities?
Yeah, so I am originally from the Czech Republic. At the time, it was Czechoslovakia. And I actually got my bachelor's in England in psychology, and I went back to the Czech Republic working in an orphanage for children with really severe, profound disabilities. And so I really wanted to do something to educate myself, but also the people around me, how to better interact, communicate, support children and adults, young adults with disabilities. At the time, it was in the Czech Republic, but of course, here when I came here.
So you started as a special ed teacher.
I started as an educational psychologist, but I only had a bachelor's degree at the time, so I was only an assistant. But I was asked to do very direct support and consultation at the time, and I wasn't quite ready or prepared, and that's why I wanted to educate myself more, and I came for graduate school to the University of Minnesota, specifically in special education, and then finished my graduate degrees, and then started working at ICI.
What is your favorite thing about your job?
I love that at ICI, it is so interdisciplinary that, me coming out of special education, I can work with people, like yourself and others who are in social work and law and psychology, child development, and that's really exciting. I can also coming out of special education, I also can do a lot of work with adults with disabilities and transition age in between. And so there's a lot of opportunity for creativity, innovation, and really working on issues that are currently relevant, be it in the community here or nationally, in my work also internationally.
Do you prefer working with older youth and adults than you do with children, or are you good with any age?
My preference has always been kind of upper middle school, high school, not little kids. And then when I came here, there was work to be done with adults, so I kind of transitioned to that area too. But my favorite area is the transition period between high school and adulthood.
Like 18 to 30-ish?
Maybe 16 to 30, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And how did you know that was your favorite age group?
Well, it's because at that age, there's just a lot that changes, that happens, a lot of questions that come up developmentally. So when I studied psychology, that was kind of an age group that was really interesting. And also because it's very challenging with services and supports and just generally, whether you have a disability or not, it's just an age that requires a lot of thinking and processing feelings and having to develop new friendships and just a lot going on.
What is your transition-oriented work focused on, and what do you hope the outcome of the research will be?
Part of my work and the team that I work with is focusing on a better coordination of the transition systems between healthcare, education, and vocational rehabilitation. But it's also creating some kind of a system, at least in Minnesota, where the different professionals can actually communicate about a young adult with a disability so that the family is not forced to go to so many different places to resolve issues across those sectors.
So if you are not as familiar with the disability support sector, so usually in the pediatric range, we worry about where people are going to go to school and where they're going to get their medical care. And then as people with disabilities and significant needs from those disabilities sort of age, we think of it more as where you're going to work, where you're going to live, and where you're going to get your medical care. So it gets a little bit more complex because there's more systems involved. And then in addition, we have the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which actually mandates a degree of coordination that doesn't extend to adulthood. So that's what that coordination piece you're talking about, that's what that refers to then?
Yes. And so it's really working in the ages 16 to 26. And you're right. So in the education law, it goes up to age 22, at least in Minnesota. But then once you, in Minnesota, get beyond the age of 22, then you can work with vocational rehabilitation. And then, of course, you still probably need healthcare, not probably, but most certainly. And the education system is no longer responsible. But the other thing I was going to say about the transition work is that a lot of the times we are so focusing on transition of the young adult to getting a job, right? Which makes sense because the person wants to work, make money, be meaningfully engaged. Transition to living perhaps more independently or living in a different setting. But a lot of the work that we do in transition is actually a little bit more basic, realizing that a lot of the young adults with disabilities, as anybody else, really just want to feel comfortable, in the life that they live. So meaning they're not always stressed out. They've got ways to relax, have friends, participate in leisure activities, and trying to really incorporate just the normal way of feeling good about yourself into the life of a teenager and beyond, right? So everybody can probably use that. Yeah. So that's a lot of the work. We are trying to remind the systems that it's not just about entering another system. It's really about just feeling good about yourself.
So in childhood, I feel like we're really good about using people's strengths and talking about like family-centered care and family-centered stuff and like you having the family help the person. And in adulthood, I feel like it's more all about like how much we cost. And I think that conversation needs to change.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot how you're going to contribute to society. And that's important. But also it's about, are you feeling well enough, and happy enough to contribute to society?
Right. What is something that you want people outside the disability community to know about the transition age range?
The child in the transition age group usually has very similar thoughts, very similar feelings. And so something we just talked about, that everybody is thinking about having something meaningful to do. So be it a job, being volunteering, but also participating with their friends.
And having friends and having the opportunity to choose their friends.
Yeah, no, not always being stressed out, filling out all these applications for jobs all the time, filling out applications for disability social security. It's really just also being part of the community. If you go to the store, if you go to the Y, just having a regular interaction with people who are there, whether we have a disability or not.
One of the things that I feel like I've noticed was people were so excited about encouraging choice when I was younger and when I was little and teaching me about that. And then when I became an adult, it was you can have the option that's the cheapest. And if there's choices in the cheapest area, then you can have something that costs the same price. But if there's only one choice that's the cheapest, you have to go with that choice. And I didn't sort of fully appreciate that.
There's so much emphasis and money focused on child development and education. Once you turn 18 or 22, it's almost like, okay, now you're an adult. In the adult system, you figure it out. There is not this creating a comfort zone and all these supports and materials and curricula. Suddenly there's like this hole of trying to figure it out. So yeah, I mean, the comment about selecting among cheapest options and the lowest cost, certainly I've seen that.
And all of a sudden you're supposed to understand that the cheapest cost is the right way to go. And and you were not supposed to understand that a year before when you were in the pediatric system.
Yeah, and then it kind of changes again, right? In the senior age. Yeah. When you're adult in a senior age group, then I hear quite a bit that then you're getting additional supports once you turn, say, 65. But that age between 22 and 65, that's like most of your life.
Or like you can have, if you have trouble cooking, say when you're older, you can have like Meals on Wheels, which is great. It's a great organization. Or you can have Mom's Meals, but like, what if you still want help cooking your favorite foods? If you can cook when you're younger, wouldn't you still want to have that experience when you're older?
Yeah, many people would, because for many people, it's a very meaningful activity. They enjoy it. It's relaxing. It's relaxing for me.
But the one thing that I feel like is exciting with the transition age is that we haven't been doing it for that long. And so there's a lot to still kind of figure out.
Yeah. In the U.S., the approach to transition, specifically for young adults with disabilities, is very specific. And it's one of the very few countries in the world that has transition written into an education law. Yep. And that's why there are supports and services, and there's funding allocated to transition services. But it tends to be a segregated program under a special education law because, again, the U.S. is one of the very few countries in the world that has the laws separated: special education law, general education law. And so the transition, while it has its merits, also tends to be one of the most segregated aspects of education in the U.S.
Which is weird because we talk about inclusion all the way up to that.
We do. And yet, I'm not saying every single school district, but many districts have sort of a building that's called a transition program that is just for people with disabilities, right? And so I mean, I don't want to go as far as, call it the I word, but oftentimes that's sort of what it feels like. Yeah.
I remember when I was in high school, I had a very obvious disability and I needed supports for that disability, but I almost had to prove that even though I needed supports, I could stay with the kids without disabilities because the other option was they had rooms specifically for the people that needed supports. And some of the regular ed teachers were supportive and some of them weren't. And some of the special ed teachers were supportive and some of them weren't.
And it's true that some staff in the transition programs are really progressive and they are trying to make connections with the community. But especially for the students with more significant disabilities, there is issues. And then a lot of programs, for example, some districts have like a little coffee shop where students with disabilities try to learn their skills. There is the bike shop. There is a wood carving shop, right? It's all wonderful, but it's still within the walls of that building. And if we talk about community inclusion, I think one has to question to what extent it's really promoting community inclusion or, leading kind of in the philosophy of sheltered workshops and things like that.
And a sheltered workshop is where someone who has a disability goes and spends their time away from other people without disabilities instead of being included in the community. And we're going to talk about that in a later episode. But Just for our listeners, that's what a sheltered workshop is. You've done quite a bit of international work in the areas of disability and special education. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I do quite a bit of work in Eastern Europe, Armenia, Ukraine, of course, Czech Republic, Southeast Asia. So that's India, Bhutan, for example. And what I love about international work is that, apart from sharing knowledge and curricula and having dialogue with teachers and parents, young adults with disabilities there, it really has shaped my work at ICI. In the research methodology that I use, the context I think about, understanding that not everybody has the same policies and laws. And so it's just been really enriching in the way that I think differently about the work here.
Compared to the other countries you've worked in, would you place the U.S. on the progressive end of the range or on the more conservative end of the range in terms of inclusion?
In terms of inclusion, so it's interesting, right? So the United States is a developed country, and there are other developed countries. And I'm not the only one to say that usually you measure the level to which the country is developed, how they treat people with disabilities and people from other disadvantaged groups. So I would say that the U.S. is quite progressive, has invested a lot of money into supporting people with disabilities and their families. That said, there are many countries in the world who have signed and ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and U.S. has not ratified, although U.S. has its own laws that fulfill that need, I guess, in many ways. The other thing I would say about inclusion is that, U.S. and many other countries have history of institutions. Well, there are many countries in the world that are not developed, that have never have institutions. And so there are some aspects of countries that are not as developed that actually have in many ways a more meaningful level of inclusion than what we have in the many parts of the US.
But do they not have institutions because they can't afford them? Because my dad goes to, he does some outreach work in Central America, and they don't have institutions either, but they just leave their people with disabilities in the closet sometimes because they can't get them out in the community.
There is that. And sometimes it is lack of finances because they didn't have the money to even think about and build these institutions. Right. But there are also countries that are not developed who have built the institutions for the reason of, hiding people away from the rest of society. I mean, that's not to say, you gave the South American example, I can give an example from India where they also are kept in closets in many parts of India. And so it's not as clear-cut and always straightforward.
So you would say that it runs the gamut. There are people that keep people, secluded because they can't afford to have them included because it does cost more money. But there are also people who could afford it and do not include.
Yeah, and also, there are countries who there is more of a family and community spirit, perhaps because it's not so industrialized, where naturally they are part of the village sort of activities during the day or on the weekend, or they're part of various religious rituals. They're part of other happenings, festivals, and they don't have to come with staff or, with paid supports. They're just coming there with their family. Nobody even thinks about them as being part of a different support system. They are just there because they're part of the community. The example I had in mind was Bhutan. It's a kingdom. It's in the Himalayan mountains. It's so mountainous that you can't even, so the people who are included in the community or as through their families, they are there, and there's not a lot else, but they're just considered part of being everything that's happening on daily or weekly basis. Because there's no institutions, there's often no school, and so back to kind of the idea of inclusion, while they may not be getting the support somebody in the US would be getting, which is great, but there are other alternative means, for them to be included.
So I knew this person when he was in high school, and he had Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, which is a condition where you, by the time you're sort of a teenager, you're using a wheelchair, and then it's progressive. So he was living in a small town in Oregon, and they made it so that he could like throw the football so that it could go through the field goal, and he really enjoyed it. And he had, tons of peers and tons of friends. And then when he moved here to Minnesota, all of a sudden everybody was like, well, we don't have that, but we have like this system. And he hated it. He just hated it because his inclusion had felt so much more natural.
I think that's what I was trying to get at. Mm-hmm.
And I think too, you'll see it a lot on like social media and stuff. They always show pictures of like people with Down syndrome who are younger and are being super included. But then I always wonder, like, how does that work when they grow up?
Right, when they transition into adulthood.
What else can we know or do to help the youth you work on behalf of to have a successful transition? Like, what can we do as just regular people, not even people who work in disability?
Well, I think we just need to be a little bit more curious about what is happening, and that there are people who may need more supports, but they want to do the same things as we do. And so just paying attention in the news, paying attention when you go grocery shopping, to exercise, and asking families how is this going? So that we figure out what kind of connections we can help make in the community. So it's not just through the system. And I think at our institute, we have a great opportunity to work as professionals, but we also make connections with families, with individuals, with schools. And so just really building awareness, and you and I talking, on the radio, I think is really important for speaking not just to the audience we typically speak to.
And I feel this isn't always true, but I feel like sometimes people with disabilities, we especially assume that they can't do something, and they might not be able to do everything, but sometimes the things that they can do, they're very, very, very good at.
When I was coming here to speak to you, I overheard one of the persons with disabilities here. He was talking about dance. And so, I dance too. So we were talking about our respective dance interests, even though each of us has totally different set of disabilities and abilities. and so connecting around an issue like dance, which is very social, there can be really inclusive. I think those are the conversations we need to have.
Yeah, well, and I know somebody who, she has a little bit more involvement than me. So she's in a wheelchair. I don't think she does much independent movement at all, like much independent or volitional movement. But she runs Zumba once a week, and she loves it, and all the people there love it.
Yeah, that's right. And so who is it to tell that that person is not able to do things like that?
She feels really valued and empowered in that environment. And I think the people that are with her also feel really valued and empowered because she's so excited to be there. Yeah. She gets A+ for enthusiasm, even on Mondays.
That's how I feel in my dance practice on Mondays. Yeah, and actually, having somebody like that call out the next move would help me immensely.
Yeah, it's really good for her too because she's working on sequencing in something that she does. It's a goal of hers in some area. So yeah. What else would you like to tell us? Either about transition or about people with disabilities or about anything else you want.
I think, I just want to maybe emphasize and elaborate on the concept of, the having services and supports and financing for those services in place is really critical. And I think U.S. does a great job at that and can be an example for many countries. But I just came back from Cuba, and there, of course, there's a lot of poverty and there's a lot of issues with government. But there is a level of humanity that happens between...
In Cuba?
Yeah, that's just an example.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just reviewing the country.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a level of humanity that happens between, the educators and people in the community, persons with disabilities and others who need support, that is very natural. So sort of a natural inclusion, natural support. And I think we underestimate the level of kind of the personal relationships in supports. We kind of try to take that out and then put in the formal supports. And so getting the balance between really natural community-based supports and supports that are paid through the system, I think need to be a little bit better balanced.
That's interesting that you say that, because I really struggle with natural supports, because as long as I've been working in this field, and I don't mean living in this field, which I do both, so it's kind of complicated, but as long as I've been working in this field, I have felt that natural supports is getting used as a way to kind of lower the costs of supporting people with disabilities, and I don't think that's an appropriate use of natural supports.
Well, so I hear that, and I don't disagree. I would say, though, that when we overuse formal paid supports, we take out a lot of the natural relationships that people build with friends and with neighbors and, also family members, of course. So
I think, too, because I work and live with the direct support crisis, it's hard for me to hear people say that we can mitigate that support crisis with the use of natural supports. I'm like, no, we can't. We can improve people's lives with the use of natural support, sure, but we can't pretend that if we just asked enough people, it would cost less to support people with disabilities.
Yeah, no, I think your point is important too, so that we are not trying to excuse the sort of more formal supports to providing supports where it's really necessary, and others cannot do that. Right. Yeah.
Right. I think we need both. Yeah. And I don't think we should twist our words around so that we hold ourselves less accountable, which I feel like is one thing that can happen. But yes, I think natural supports are important. I live like a block away from one sister and 2 blocks away from another sister, and they provide me with a lot of natural supports, and that works beautifully. Because I do all the Costco shopping for them, and I do all the grocery delivery. So then it's not really equal because I take a lot of their time, but we feel it works for us.
Yeah, and that's what matters. So that it works for everybody, and everybody feels like they are interacting in a way that feels comfortable.
Yeah, not that one person is like the only example, but natural supports can certainly work. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you for coming. And thank you for the work that you do. It's really exciting, and I hope it gets easier, but I don't know if it will. Thank you for coming.
Boldly Challenging Ableism is a co-production of AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and the Institute on Community Integration at the University of Minnesota. For more information, please visit ici.umn.edu.